Dictation 14. Ready? It is in this way that logic has been pursued by those of the great philosophers who were mystics. But since they usually took for granted that supposed insight of the mystic emotion, their logical doctrines were presented with a certain dryness, and were believed by their disciples to be quite independent of the sudden illumination from which they sprang. Nevertheless, their origin clung to them and they remained, to borrow a useful word from malicious in regard to the world of science and common sense. It is only to be that we can account for the complacency with which philosophers have accepted the inconsistency of their doctrines with all the common and scientific facts which seem best established and most worthy of belief. The logic of mysticism shows as in natural the defects which are inherent in anything malicious. The impulse to logic, not felt while the mystic mood is dominant, reasserts itself as the mood fades, but with a desire to retain the vanishing insight, or at least to prove that it was insight, and that what seems to contradict it is illusion. The logic which thus arises is not quite disinterested or candid, and is inspired by a certain hatred of the daily world to which it is to be applied. Such an attitude naturally does not tend to the best results. Everyone knows that to read an author simply in order to refute him is not the way to understand him, and to read the book of nature with a conviction that it is all illusion is just as unlikely to lead to understanding. If our logic is to find the common world intelligible, it must not be hostile, but must be inspired by a genuine acceptance, such as is not usually to be found among metaphysicians. The unreality of time is a cardinal doctrine of many metaphysical systems, often nominally based, as already by Parmenides, upon logical arguments, but originally derived, at any rate in the founders of new systems, from the certainty which is born in the moment of mystic insight. As a Persian Sufi poet says, past and future are what veil God from our sight. Burn up both of them with fire. How long will thou be partitioned by these segments as a reed? The belief that what is ultimately real must be immutable is a very common one. It gave rise to the metaphysical notion of substance, and finds even now a wholly illegitimate satisfaction in such scientific doctrines as the conservation of energy and mass. It is difficult to disentangle the truth and the error in this view. The arguments for the contention that time is unreal and that the world of sense is illusory must, I think, be regarded as fallacious. Nevertheless, there is some sense, easier to feel than to state, in which time is an unimportant and superficial characteristic of reality. Past and future must be acknowledged to be as real as the present, and a certain emancipation from slavery to time is essential to philosophic thought. The importance of time is rather practical than theoretical, rather in relation to our desires than in relation to truth. A truer image of the world, I think, is obtained by picturing things as entering into the stream of time from an internal world outside, than from a view which regards time as the devouring tyrant of all that is, both in thought and in feeling. Even though time be real, to realize the unimportance of time is the gate of wisdom. That this is the case may be seen at once by asking ourselves why our feelings towards the past are so different from our feelings towards the future. The reason for this difference is wholly practical. Our wishes can affect the future but not the past. The future is to some extent subject to our power, while the past is unalterably fixed. But every future will someday be past. If we see the past truly now, it must, when it was still future, have been just what we now see it to be. And what is now future must be just what we shall see it to be when it has become past. The felt difference of quality between past and future, therefore, is not an intrinsic difference, but only a difference in relation to us. To impartial contemplation, it ceases to exist, and impartiality of contemplation is, in the intellectual sphere, the very same virtue of disinterestedness which, in the sphere of action, appears as justice and unselfishness. Whosoever wishes to see the world truly, to rise in thought above the tyranny of practical desires, must learn to overcome the difference of attitude towards past and future, and to survey the whole stream of time in one comprehensive vision. The kind of way in which, as it seems to me, time ought not to enter into our theoretic philosophical thought may be illustrated by the philosophy which has become associated with the idea of evolution, and which is exemplified by pragmatism and Bergson's. This philosophy, on the basis of the development which has led from the lowest forms of life up to man, sees in progress the fundamental law of the universe, and thus admits the difference between earlier and later into the very citadel of its contemplative outlook. With its past and future history of the world, conjectural as it is, I do not wish to quarrel, but I think that in the intoxication of a quick success, much that it is required for a true understanding of the universe has been forgotten. Something of Hellenism, something too of Oriental resignation must be combined with its hurrying Western self assertion before it can emerge from the ardor of youth into the mature wisdom of manhood. In spite of its appeals to science, the true scientific philosophy, I think, is something more arduous than more aloof, appealing to less mundane hopes and requiring a server discipline for its successful practice. Darwin's Origin of Species persuaded the world that the difference between different species of animals and plants is not the fixed immutable difference that it appears to be. The doctrine of natural kinds, which had rendered classification easy and definite, which was enshrined in the Aristotelian tradition and protected by its supposed necessity for orthodox dogma, was suddenly swept away forever out of the biological world. The difference between man and the lower animals, which to our human conceit appears enormous, was shown to be a gradual achievement, involving intermediate beings who could not with certainty be placed either within or without the human family. Finished